My name is Claire Whitmore, and I am very good at my job. I need you to understand this before I tell you everything that follows, because at certain points in this story, many points, actually, with alarming regularity, it will not look that way. It will look like I am a disaster. It will look like someone handed a highly educated woman a brand new situation, and she responded by emotionally combusting in a series of escalating, professionally questionable ways. And I just need you to have the context that, before Hartwell Engineering, I had a perfect record. 12 engagements. 12 satisfied clients. 0 incidents involving go-karts, fondue, or structural load-bearing calculations scrawled on a Nando's receipt. I am a management consultant. I walk into companies that are bleeding money, hemorrhaging efficiency, or simply being run by people who think synergy is a strategy, and I fix them. I ask the uncomfortable questions. I read the room. I deliver the report, implement the plan, shake hands, collect the invoice, and leave. Clean. Surgical. I am, as my colleague Priya once described me, a scalpel in a blazer. Hartwell Engineering was supposed to be routine. The brief said, medium-sized structural engineering firm, third-generation family business, brilliant technical output, operational processes stuck somewhere in 2009. The founder, Gerald Hartwell, had finally agreed to bring in outside consultants after his accountant, God bless that man, showed him a spreadsheet so alarming it apparently made him sit down on the floor of his own office. My firm won the contract. I got the assignment. I had 12 weeks, a detailed action plan, and a new set of color-coded tabs in my project binder. I arrived on a Monday. This is important. Mondays are my best day. I am a Monday person in the way other people are morning people. I arrive calibrated, resourced, ready. I had taken the train from London to Bristol the night before, checked into a very sensible hotel, gone to bed at 10, and woken up at 6 for a run that I actually completed, which is not always the case but felt like a good omen. I walked into Hartwell Engineering at 8:47 a.m. with my laptop bag, my project binder, my very good coffee from the place 2 streets over, and a quiet, private confidence that this was going to go well. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named who wore reading glasses on a chain of tiny silver stars, smiled at me warmly. You must be the consultant. Oh lovely. We've been expecting you. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Daniel's already in. He's been here since 6. You know what he's like. I did not know what he was like. I was about to find out. I turned toward the open plan office, balancing my coffee, my laptop bag, and the beginnings of a professionally warm smile. The one I use at the start of engagements, which says I'm approachable but I am also absolutely going to restructure your filing system. And walked directly into a man coming the other way around the corner. The coffee went first. I want to be clear that it was a full cup. A large. Oat milk flat white. Hot enough to matter. It left my hand in what felt like slow motion and made contact with approximately 70% of his shirt. A pale blue shirt, naturally, because the universe has a sense of humor, before the cup hit the floor with a hollow, damning plastic clatter. There was a silence. He looked down at his shirt, then up at me. He had dark hair that needed a cut by about 3 weeks, eyes that were an unfair shade of gray-green, and an expression of such complete, unruffled calm that I briefly wondered if he was in shock. Hi, he said. I'm Daniel. I'm so sorry, I said. I'm Claire. The consultant. Yes. I looked at his shirt. I'm so sorry. He looked down at it again, as if he'd forgotten it was there. It's fine. I've got another one in my desk drawer. You keep a spare shirt in your desk. 3rd one this month, he said pleasantly. And then he stepped past me to get to the kitchen, and I stood in the corridor of Hartwell Engineering, utterly coffeeless and already completely wrong-footed, and thought, 12 weeks. I just need 12 weeks. Reader, it took me considerably longer than that. Chapter 1. My first official act as consultant to Hartwell Engineering was to call a staff briefing. Standard procedure. Introduce myself, outline the engagement, set expectations, reassure everyone that no, I'm not here to make anyone redundant. I'm here to improve processes, not people. I've given this speech 11 times. I can do it in my sleep. What I could not have anticipated was that Daniel Hartwell would spend the first 6 minutes of my presentation standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, and an expression I can only describe as politely combative, like a man who disagreed with me profoundly, but was too well raised to say so immediately. He waited. I'll give him that. He waited until I put up the slide labeled Preliminary Operational Assessment and said the words, "From what I've observed so far." His hand went up. I blinked. "Yes. You've been here 4 hours. I'm aware." Just wanted to make sure the slide knew that. There was a ripple of suppressed laughter from the engineering team. I kept my face professionally neutral, which I am very good at. "These are preliminary findings, Mr. Hartwell. That's what the word means." "Sure." He nodded slowly, in the manner of someone agreeing with you while not agreeing with you at all. "It's just that flowchart you've drawn for our project intake process. It's missing a step." "Which step?" He walked, unhurried, entirely comfortable, to the whiteboard beside my presentation screen, picked up a marker without asking, and drew 3 additional boxes connected by arrows, annotating them with the efficiency of a man who did this daily, which I would later learn he did. Daniel thought in diagrams. His desk had 6 whiteboards of varying sizes. The smallest one was on his kitchen wall at home. He told me this later as if it was normal. The addition was infuriatingly correct. "That's the feasibility loop," he said, capping the marker and setting it down. "We run it parallel to intake, not after. Saves us about 2 weeks on project onboarding." I looked at the diagram. I looked at him. "Why isn't that documented anywhere?" He shrugged. "It's in my head." "Mr. Hartwell," I said carefully, "half of what I'm here to fix is things that are in people's heads and not in any document that would survive if those people were hit by a bus." He considered this. "That's a very dark framing. It's a standard operational risk." "Sure, but you could have said won lottery, or moved to Tuscany." I added Daniel Hartwell, chaos agent, to my private project notes that evening. Underneath it I wrote, "Also, the flowchart correction was valid." And then, because I am honest with myself above all things, I wrote, "He has very nice handwriting for an engineer." I deleted that last line. Then I retyped it. Then I closed the laptop entirely and went to have a shower, which I did not need, but felt necessary. Chapter 2. There are things you can learn about a person from their professional reputation, their CV, their colleagues' carefully diplomatic phrasing during stakeholder interviews. And then there are things you can only learn by being in an enclosed space with them when they microwave salmon. It was a Tuesday. It was 1:04 p.m. I know this precisely because I had a 1:15 meeting with the finance team, and I was in the kitchen making tea, running mentally through my talking points, completely at peace with the world. The kitchen smelled of instant coffee and someone's birthday cake from the day before. It was fine. Everything was fine. Then Daniel walked in with a Tupperware container, nodded at me affably, and put it in the microwave. "What's in that?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "Salmon." "Daniel." "What?" "You cannot microwave salmon in a shared kitchen." He turned to look at me with the expression of a man who has never once considered this. Not as a man who knew and didn't care. As a man who had existed for however many years on this earth and simply never encountered the information. "Why not?" "Because it smells." "It's food. Food smells." "There is a scale," I said. "This is a 7-minute microwave salmon situation in a room with no windows that opens directly onto an open-plan office. This is not just food smells. This is a diplomatic incident." He looked at the microwave. The timer said 4 minutes 20 seconds. "It's nearly done." "Daniel." "It's protein. I've got a site visit at 2. I need protein." The microwave beeped. The smell hit us both simultaneously. He opened the door with complete serenity. I took a step backwards. "It's really not that bad," he said, picking up a fork. From the open-plan office, someone audibly said, "Oh God, is that fish again?" Daniel pointed his fork at me. "That might be a separate salmon." "It is absolutely not a separate salmon." We stood in the kitchen while the engineering team staged what I can only describe as a passive-aggressive mass exodus to the far end of the office. Daniel ate his salmon with the unruffled contentment of a man entirely at peace with himself and the world. I made my tea, holding my breath intermittently, and watched him with the fascinated horror of someone observing a natural phenomenon they cannot explain or prevent. "You do this regularly," I said. It was not a question. "Tuesdays and Thursdays." He snapped the Tupperware lid back on. "High omega-3. Great for cognitive function." "Your cognitive function," I said, "is a hazard to others." He grinned at that, a proper unguarded grin, a little crooked on the left side. And something irritating happened in my chest. I chose to ignore it. I chose to ignore it for approximately 6 more weeks before that stopped being an option. Chapter 3. I will be upfront. I wore heels to a construction site. In my defense, nobody told me I'd be going to a construction site. The meeting agenda said stakeholder alignment session, and the location said Hartwell Project, Clifton Road. I assumed office. I assumed, at minimum, a building with a floor. There was no floor. There was scaffolding, compacted gravel, and Daniel in a hard hat looking deeply amused. "You're going to struggle in those," he said, surveying my shoes with the expression of a man heroically not laughing. "I've fine. The ground isn't flat. I've fine." I was not fine. Within 4 minutes I had wobbled, overcorrected, and grabbed his forearm for balance with enough force to leave. I later noticed small fingernail impressions in his jacket. He caught my elbow with the reflexes of a man who caught things for a living, which technically he did, and steadied me without comment, which I respected enormously. He gave me spare sight boots from his van. They were 3 sizes too large. I spent the afternoon shuffling around a half-built pedestrian bridge in boots. I had to clench my toes to keep on, watching Daniel explain structural load calculations to the site foreman with a passion that was, objectively, embarrassing to witness in a good way. He loved it. Not in the performed, look how enthusiastic I am way that some people do their jobs. He loved it. The physics of it, the problem-solving of it, the fact that he was building something that would be walked on for 50 years by people who'd never know his name, and he didn't seem to mind that at all. "Does it bother you?" I asked, standing beside him on the half-finished deck, looking out over the Bristol skyline. The oversized boots made me feel approximately 3 years old. That people just use the bridge? They don't think about who designed it. He looked at me like the question surprised him. "No. Why would it? It's a bridge. It should be used." He tilted his head. "Does it bother consultants when companies just run well, without thinking about who fixed them?" I thought about this. Honestly, a bit, yes. He laughed, a proper one, head slightly back. "At least you're honest." "I am always honest," I said. "It's my most exhausting quality." He looked at me then, for a moment too long to be casual, with an expression I couldn't quite categorize, and I felt the back of my neck go warm in a way that had nothing to do with the Bristol wind, which was, for the record, considerable. I shuffled in my enormous boots and looked firmly back at the skyline. Chapter 4. Every year, Hartwell Engineering holds a staff retreat. This year it was at a country activity center in the Cotswolds. 2 days, team-building exercises, a quiz night, and, critically, a go-kart track. I was not going to do the go-karting. I am a professional. I was attending the retreat in a professional capacity. I planned to observe, take notes on team dynamics, perhaps facilitate a brief process workshop, and stay very firmly off the go-kart track. Then Daniel looked at me over the sign-up sheet and said, entirely casually, "I thought consultants were supposed to get stuck in." Reader, I signed up for the go-karting. I had not, to be clear, driven a go-kart since I was 11. This fact did not fully occur to me until I was strapped into a cart that smelled of petrol and old rubber, with a helmet that had bananas written on it in permanent marker. I did not investigate why, and a green flag was waved. I was fine for the first 2 laps. Better than fine, actually. I was 5th out of 12, which I considered respectable for a woman who had not been near a go-kart in 20-odd years. I was gaining on the cart in front of me. I was focused. I was, and I want this noted, doing quite well. Then I glanced across the track and saw Daniel in the lead cart, driving with the relaxed competence of someone who does things well without thinking about it. And he looked over and gave me a brief, acknowledging nod, the kind that says good, you're keeping up. And something in my spatial processing apparently short-circuited, because I steered directly into the tire barrier on the next corner, bounced off it, careered across the track, and embedded the front of my cart into the decorative hedge that lined the pit lane. The go-kart stopped. The hedge did not give me a warm reception. There was a very long silence from the rest of the staff. Daniel pulled up beside me. He looked at the hedge. He looked at me. He was very clearly fighting something in his face. "Don't," I said. "I'm not saying anything. Your face is saying something." "My face," he said with supreme effort, "is expressing only concern for your well-being." "It is absolutely not." He lost the fight then completely, and laughed properly, both hands briefly off the wheel, head back, shoulders shaking. It was the kind of laugh that made other people laugh too, which several of my colleagues did. And I sat in my hedge-embedded cart with as much dignity as I could muster and decided that I would process the embarrassment later, privately, in my hotel room, with the minibar. He helped me dislodge the cart from the hedge, and his hands were warm through his racing gloves, and he was still grinning, and I hated him for approximately 10 minutes before I started laughing too, which I also processed privately later, and which told me more than I was ready to know. Chapter 5. It happened by accident, the way most significant things seem to, not in the dramatic, movie moment fashion I might have imagined, but quietly, over terrible vending machine coffee at 9:30 on a Thursday night, when we were the only two people left in the Hartwell engineering office. I had a deadline. He had a deadline. Our deadlines overlapped, and so there we were, at adjacent desks in an otherwise empty open-plan office, with the kind of exhausted, stripped-back ease that only sets in when it's too late to maintain pretense. He ordered pizza. He ordered enough for two without asking, and set half in front of me without ceremony, which I found impossible to object to. We worked. We ate. Occasionally one of us said something about what we were working on, and the other said something back, and before I quite noticed, we were talking, really talking, the kind that wanders in circles and occasionally doubles back on itself. He told me about the bridge he was most proud of, a pedestrian crossing in Edinburgh, nothing grand, but he'd designed it around a single constraint. It had to be crossable by a wheelchair user and a parent with a double buggy at the same time, on a narrow budget, without looking utilitarian. "It's the best thing I've built," he said, and he said it simply without ego. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's used," he said, which was what he'd said before. But this time I understood it differently. I told him about my best engagement, not the biggest or the most lucrative, but a small family-run logistics company on the verge of collapse, where I'd worked for 3 months, and the owner had cried when I handed him my final report because the company was solvent again and her 60 employees still had jobs. I'd never told anyone at my firm that she'd cried. I wasn't sure why I told him. He listened. Properly, the way some people don't. "You actually care," he said. Not accusatory. Just noting it. Ido. Which makes the job harder than it should be. That's not a flaw. My firm disagrees. He picked up a napkin, a greasy pizza-branded napkin, and drew a small diagram on it. A circle subdivided. "That's you," he said. "Every engagement. You're managing 4 competing pressures simultaneously." He labeled them client needs, staff morale, commercial outcome, your own standards. I looked at it. "Did you just diagram me?" Occupational habit. He set down the pen. "The point is, most consultants I've worked with only track 2 of those. You're doing all 4. That's why it's hard. Not because you're bad at it." I stared at the napkin for a moment longer than I should have. "Are you keeping it?" he asked. "No," I said, and folded it up and put it in my bag. Chapter 6. There is a professional principle, unwritten, understood, treated in consultancy circles with the gravity of a commandment, which is, do not develop feelings for a client's employee. Especially not a client's employee who is also the founding family's nephew. Especially not when you are in week 6 of a 12-week engagement with a clear deliverable and a reputation built on clean exits. I was in week 7 when I admitted to myself that I had comprehensively failed this principle. It happened in the stairwell, which is an undignified location for an epiphany, but here we are. I had been heading down to the car park. He had been heading up from it. We met on the 2nd floor landing in that moment where 2 people are approaching from opposite directions and both slow and then stop, slightly too close, because the landing is small and the timing is bad and neither of you quite moves. "Hey," he said. "Hi," I said. And there was a pause, 3 seconds, maybe 4, in which neither of us said anything, and he looked at me with that look he occasionally had that I'd spent 6 weeks cataloging and failing to categorize. And something happened in the air between us that I cannot describe in operational terms. Then my phone rang. It was my project director in London. I answered it. Daniel stepped aside to let me pass. And I walked down the stairs with my heart doing something irregular and unprofessional. And I spent the entire phone call not hearing a single word my project director said. That evening, I called Priya. "I have a situation," I said. "The engineer," she said immediately. "I haven't. Claire. You've mentioned him in every update call. He corrected my flowchart." He microwaved salmon. He made a diagram of me on a napkin. You talk about this man the way people talk about someone they are absolutely gone for. I am not. The napkin, Claire. I looked at my bag, where the napkin was folded, in the inner pocket. The napkin, I agreed quietly. Chapter 7. The problem with realizing you have feelings for someone, when you are a professional whose currency is clarity, is that you immediately overcorrect. I know this about myself. I know that my response to emotional chaos is operational control. I know that I build walls using deliverables and deadlines like other people build them using silence and distance. I know all of this. Self-knowledge has never once stopped me from doing it anyway. I became, in week 8, profoundly, heroically professional. I scheduled everything. I communicated exclusively via email when I could manage it. I used Daniel's correct title, Mr. Hartwell, in meetings, which I had not done in weeks, and which he clearly noticed from the brief, unreadable look it produced. I referenced the engagement timeline constantly. I said the word deliverable so many times that I started to hear it in my own voice in dreams. It was objectively terrible behavior. The collision, when it came, happened on a Wednesday. I presented an interim report that recommended restructuring the project management function. A genuine, well-reasoned recommendation that I stood behind completely. And Daniel, reviewing the relevant section, said very quietly in the debrief, "This is about Marcus." Marcus was the project manager. He was also, I had come to understand, Daniel's oldest friend in the company. "It's about the role," I said. "You're recommending we restructure him out of a job." "I'm recommending the function be restructured. What happens to Marcus is an HR decision." "Don't do that," he said. His voice was level, but something in it was different, stripped of its usual warmth, precise in a way that felt, coming from him, like an accusation. "Don't go corporate on me now. Not after." He stopped. "After what?" I said, and I hated how careful my voice sounded. He looked at me steadily. "Nothing. The report's thorough. Well done." He picked up his copy and left the room. And I sat at the table with my professionally neutral face on and felt the cold, specific misery of having done something right for all the wrong reasons. Chapter 8. I found him at his desk at 7 in the evening, the office empty again, 3 whiteboards covered in calculations that meant nothing to me and everything to him. I handled the Marcus situation badly, I said without preamble, because I am not built for preamble when I'm in the wrong. He set down his marker, turned to look at me. I let something personal affect how I communicated a professional recommendation. I continued, "Not the recommendation itself. I stand by the analysis. But the way I presented it and the way I've been." I paused. "I've been strange this week. Deliberately strange. And you didn't deserve that." He was quiet for a moment. "Why were you strange?" "Because I'm better at frameworks than feelings, and I couldn't find a framework." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached for a fresh marker and held it out to me. "Draw me a diagram," he said. "Daniel, you're a visual thinker when you're relaxed. I've watched you do it. Draw me a diagram of whatever you can't put into a framework." I took the marker. I looked at the whiteboard. I drew, after a moment's hesitation, 2 overlapping circles. I labeled one professional boundaries. I labeled the other one what I actually feel. In the overlap section, after a pause long enough to be embarrassing, I wrote, "This is a problem." He leaned forward and looked at it. Then he took his own marker and drew a 3rd circle around both of them, enclosing them entirely, and labeled it, "Me too." We looked at the whiteboard. "This is a very strange way to have a conversation," I said. "You started it," he said. And then we laughed, both of us, at the whiteboard, at ourselves, and it was fine. It was completely fine. And I had not expected that such a considerable amount of weight could leave my chest so quickly. Chapter 9. We agreed, in a negotiation conducted with the gravity of a UN treaty, that nothing would happen until after the engagement ended. 12 days. Professionally appropriate. We were both adults. We could manage 12 days. We managed 4 before Daniel suggested a working dinner to discuss the Q3 implementation timeline, which we both knew was not principally about the Q3 implementation timeline. And I said yes, which I also knew. The restaurant was small and Italian and he'd clearly thought about it, which I clocked and then pretended not to clock, and then thought about on the way home for approximately 45 minutes. The Q3 timeline took 11 minutes. The remaining 2 hours were the best conversation I'd had in longer than I cared to calculate. Careening from the economics of Victorian railway construction, his, to the ethics of corporate restructuring, mine, to the question of whether any film sequel has ever genuinely improved on the original, undecided, ongoing, revisited in subsequent weeks at considerable length. He walked me back to my hotel. On the pavement outside, in the particular way that Bristol manages to make even a functional city street feel cinematic, he stopped and said, 8 days. 8 days, I agreed. Then I'm going to ask you something. Okay. Just, he smiled slightly crooked, prepare a framework. I don't have one for this. No, he said. Neither do I. He waited until I was through the hotel door before he left, which I know because I looked back. Chapter 10. The final report was, I say with complete objectivity, excellent. 47 pages of analysis, recommendations, and implementation guidance, bound in the dark green covers that my firm uses, sitting in a stack of 8 copies on Gerald Hartwell's meeting table. I had presented it that morning to the senior leadership team. Gerald had shaken my hand and said, with genuine emotion, "This company will be better for this." I had thanked him professionally and felt the particular warmth of a job done properly. I had one final thing to do. I found Daniel in his office, an actual enclosed office, unlike the open plan, which he used approximately 15% of the time, preferring the central whiteboard wall. Sitting on his desk rather than at it, reading through something, half turned toward the window. "Done," he said, without looking up. "Done." I sat in the chair across from him. "The report's with Gerald. My firm will handle any follow-up queries." "Right." He set down what he was reading, looked at me. "How do you feel?" "Good," I said. "Professionally satisfied." A pause. "Personally terrified." He slid off the desk, crossed to the door, which he closed, which in an engineering firm full of people with open-door policies constituted a bold move. Turned back to me. "I was going to wait until after 5, he said. "But it's 4:46, and I've been patient for a really quite unreasonable amount of time. And I want to ask you something." "Ask," I said. My heart was doing the thing again. "Dinner. Not a working one. No timelines. No deliverables. Just," he made a gesture that was vague and somehow exactly right. "You and me and probably an argument about sequels." I looked at him, at this infuriating, brilliant, salmon microwaving, whiteboard thinking, hard hat wearing man who had made a diagram of my feelings on a napkin and kept it, and said, "I'll need to flag a conflict of interest to my firm. Obviously. And we'll need to be practical about the distance long term." "I know. And you cannot microwave fish if I'm ever in your kitchen." He considered this with genuine seriousness. "That's a significant ask. Those are my terms." "Done," he said, and smiled, that crooked, unguarded, completely unfair smile. "Was that a yes?" "Daniel," I said, "that was absolutely a yes." Chapter 11. I have, in the past 6 months, made a number of observations. The first is that engineers, as a category, are extremely annoying to argue with because they insist on being correct more often than is statistically reasonable. And Daniel is the apotheosis of this, but he is also the first person who has ever listened to my arguments with genuine interest rather than waiting for me to stop talking, which makes being wrong in front of him considerably more tolerable than it should be. The second is that the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which I now cross occasionally on Sunday mornings, is extraordinary, and that I have started noticing the engineering of everything, bridges, buildings, the coffee shop staircase that Daniel clocked as structurally substandard on our first visit, and I now cannot stop seeing, and I do not know whether to be grateful or annoyed about this. The third is that his flat has 5 white bards. I brought a 6th one as a joke and he was genuinely delighted, which tells you everything about Daniel Hartwell. The fourth, and I say this as someone who did not see it coming, could not have planned for it, would not have listed it in any risk assessment, is that being with someone who operates on an entirely different frequency to you is not, as I assumed, a compatibility problem. It is, in fact, the whole point. He thinks in structures. I think in systems. He builds things that last 50 years. I help organizations find the room to build them. We argue about everything from bridge aesthetics to whether a Sunday morning constitutes an appropriate time to begin calculating load distributions on a paper napkin at breakfast, which it does not, but I've stopped confiscating the napkin. I have not become someone who doesn't have a plan. I have become someone whose plan occasionally, frequently, involves a man with whiteboard markers in his jacket pocket and a spare shirt in his desk drawer. And I find, to my complete and ongoing surprise, that I don't mind at all. He still microwaves salmon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have agreed that this is technically his flat. For now. Epilogue. 1 year later. There's a framed napkin on the wall of our kitchen. It's the one from the late night, the greasy pizza-branded one with the circle diagram on it. Client needs. Staff morale. Commercial outcome. Your own standards. He had it framed without telling me, and hung it while I was in London for 3 days on a new engagement. And when I came back and found it, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, and felt something so full and so simple that I couldn't quite find a word for it. You framed the napkin, I said when he came in. I told you, he said. Good structural analysis deserves to be preserved. I turned around. He was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing the expression I'd spent a year learning. The one that looked like casual amusement but was, underneath, entirely sincere. You're insufferable, I said. You're in love with me, he said. I am. Completely, chaotically, without a framework or a flowchart to show for it. Don't push it, I said. He grinned. Crooked on the left. I did not have a plan for any of this. It's the best project I've ever worked on.